Good evening, and thank you once again for joining us here at the Star of Zion. I am Sam Brown, your managing editor, and we are so excited to have you with us tonight. Please follow us on Facebook, YouTube. Go to our website, www.thestarofzion.org. Subscribe to our paper. Be updated with all of the current news and data. We here at the Star of Zion are committed to fulfilling our mission, providing you with news that is credible, reliable, and dependable. On behalf of our editor in chief, Mr. Darren Kent, we welcome you to our conversation tonight when the Freedom Church speaks. Tonight, we will talk about the important impacts of the AME Zion Church on education and the development of the plight of Black people in America, the contributions of some of our leadership to the geopolitical sphere, to the contributions of our leadership to government in this country, and the forward progression of our nation as we continue to form a more perfect union. The role that our church has played, the role that the faith community has played to ensure that America lives up to the standards set forth in our great Constitution. We would encourage you to please go to our website and look at our most recent articles that we have published, information coming to you, keeping you informed on all of the happenings, not only in the AME Zion Church, but around the entire world. We're so excited to have shared with you over this course month, under the new leadership of our current administration, our previous conversations that have dealt with the fight for freedom and justice. We are so excited to be having on next Thursday, the 28th, a discussion around the effects of breast cancer and the effects that it has on the families, and information that can be used by persons to take preventative measures to safeguard themselves from this disease. And we're so excited for the professionals that we'll have with us on next week. Dr. Kim Brooks, one of our first ladies of the Greater Warner Tabernacle AME Zion Church, and gynecologist in Knoxville, Tennessee, will be one of our subject matter experts. And then we're so excited to have joining us next week the Reverend Dr. Anthony Witherspoon, who will speak from the aspect of someone as a member of a family who has been affected by breast cancer. Tonight, we're so excited to have our esteemed guests, one representing our chief institution, Livingstone College, and another, our bishop of the Piedmont Episcopal District, and also both of them, shall I say, are Livingstone College graduates. We're so excited to have with us tonight Dr. DeTarvia Parrish, professor of English at Livingstone College, right out of the Florida Conference, the Varick Memorial AME Zion Church in Jacksonville, Florida. This is an effort to have thought-provoking and stimulating conversation on this platform, the Star of Zion. We want to show you, Zion, that we have within our church scholars, leaders who are capable, who are competent to keep you informed with the information of not only what we are doing, but what we have done, so that we can be inspired to press forward towards the future. We want to encourage all of you to please, as we said, subscribe, but also consider the Star of Zion as an advertising platform, as we have readership across the globe on 6 continents. Please purchase an ad in the Star of Zion. You may visit our website, www.starofzion.org, where you can see the pricing and all of the requirements if you would like to advertise in the print edition of our paper or advertise on our various digital and social media platforms. And we're so excited about the vision of our new editor-in-chief and chief communications officer for the AME Zion Church, Mr. Darren Kent.
Good evening, Reverend Brown. How are you?
Hello, Dr. Parrish. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
And thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm excited to be here to talk about Livingstone College. There are so many things that I love about Beneath Thy Maples and Thy Oaks, but I am so excited to share this opportunity to share with my bishop of the Piedmont Episcopal District, Bishop Darrell B. Starnes. Bishop Starnes, you going to join me in the show?
I am so excited to be with you, Dr. Parrish. This is an exciting topic, and I am looking forward to this time with you today.
Fantastic. So I understand that our subject matter is that of Livingstone College and the AME Zion Church, the influence that it has actually made on our Mosaic world. And I just want to go ahead and get started because I know the hour is upon us. So the one thing that I love about Livingstone is that in essence, it has a FUBU brand. Do you know what FUBU is? You remember FUBU, the clothing?
I do remember.
Do you know what the acronym represents?
For us, by us.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And that's the one thing that I love about Livingstone. I love the Black self-governance. I love the essence of people's religious practices and education rooted in its own social and historical experiences. So to me, this translates into an authentic spiritual expression and even more a spiritual fulfillment of me pretty much understanding myself. You know, in that temple of Luxor, know thyself, right? So let us move forward. I have a few notes here, well, a few talking points. I want to start with African Americans in the demographic perspective. All right. Since we're talking about HBCUs, many of our HBCUs are located in the South. But we must recognize the origin of HBCUs, such as Cheney University in 1837 in Pennsylvania, and that's pretty much founded by the Quakers. Lincoln University, that began as Ashland Institute in 1854, that's a Presbyterian. And then if you move down a little, you're going to have Wilberforce in Ohio in 1853 by the Methodist Episcopal Church, and then it closes for a while, and then the AME Church pretty much picks this up, and then we come down south to Shaw University in 1865, right? Right. And so 1865 is, of course, the end of the Civil War. But let's back up a little bit. Before the Civil War, I saw a census once that talked about the population in 1790. In 1790, the United States population was perhaps 4 million. And of that 4 million, 750,000 were persons of African descent. And in that number, in that 750,000, 89% of that population was from the South Atlantic states. So, as I stated, although the Civil War doesn't take place until the 1860s, America also had, though, a free Black population, particularly in the northern states, even though it was somewhat on a decline, which is another statistic that I found. In 1830, free Black population was 2.5, and I think in 1860, the free Black population was 1.6. Nevertheless, though, within that population, we have our leaders, we have our elders who are fighting for progression. And as they continue to fight, institutions begin to emerge, right? And because they have a desire to participate in cultural traditions and anything else. So of that, it is evident those institutions that do come out of that movement are going to be the Black church. So tell us something about the origins of the AME Zion Church in the Northern Hemisphere of our nation, and them even recognizing the critical role education plays in securing our community's progress.
Thank you for that question. Um, to really understand the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, we have to understand the Methodist movement, which started as a renewal movement in the Church of England. That renewal movement spread to the New World, and many of those people called Methodists would worship at the Episcopal churches, which are the Anglican churches in America. And they would have their own Methodist services and class meetings after the Episcopal service was over. However, the Revolutionary War broke out in America, and that caused many of the Episcopal priests to leave the colonies and go back to England, where they were being paid by the King of England. This left the Methodists in America without a means of getting sacrament. And so John Wesley, the founder of the movement, was forced to ordain Francis Asbury and Daniel Coke, send them to America, and all those Methodists gathered in a Christmas conference in 1784 in Baltimore, Maryland, and started the Methodist Episcopal Church. Well, a few years after that, because of discrimination, the AME founders pulled away in 1787 from the St. George Church in Philadelphia and started the AME Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And then in 1796 in New York, Blacks pulled away from the John Street Methodist Episcopal Church and started the AME Church. So you had two AME churches. One started in Philadelphia, the other started in New York. And the leader of the AME Church in Philadelphia was Richard Allen, and there were many leaders, but the person that we call the founder of the AME Zion Church, Zion being added later, was James Varick. From the beginning of the Zion Church, there was an emphasis on education. In fact, when they had that barn used for their first services, they had a portion of it for teaching and educating. And many of those Blacks were free Blacks in the North, as you said, and they had a strong emphasis on education. And so as the AME Zion Church spread in almost every area where they were started and where churches were started, there was an emphasis on schools and on education.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And so as you talk about it's kind of funny because you mentioned the segregation in the North. The one thing that I actually had this discussion with someone earlier, the impotence for separating the races, I think what many don't realize is actually a Northern construct. When we think of our Southern way of life, and we always pin back this separate but equal doctrine to Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896 in Louisiana. However, the precedent for that case is actually one of Mary Miles in Philadelphia, where you had a school teacher on a train who was pretty much forced to relocate to a segregated, in essence, segregated portion of the train. But of course, she was eventually put off the train. She's kind of like a Rosa Parks of her day, right? And even you hear about in Frederick Douglass's narrative how he talks about, he's complaining about being kicked off of a train. So this impotence for segregation is a Northern construct, but it just seems like it's so heavy in the South. And as we move to the South, I must mention James Walker Hood, all right, an astounding leader of the AME Zion Church, but also a true North Carolina statesman as it relates to politics. You have James Walker Hood, who was the assistant superintendent for North Carolina Public Schools through the Freedmen's Bureau. In addition, he's going to be the author of the Reconstruction Amendment for the state of North Carolina. He presents this in Raleigh in 1868 at a convention. He's also establishes the Black Caucus. He's also the Grand Master for the Masons in North Carolina. The list goes on and on and on to the achievements and accomplishments of James Walker Hood. But let's move to Concord, North Carolina, right? Tell us about the establishment of Zion Wesley Institute and then how it transitioned to Livingstone College in Salisbury, North Carolina.
Well, I first want to touch on Bishop Hood,
Okay.
who was a pastor in the New England Conference in the state of Connecticut. And he was challenged by a bishop at that time to be a missionary to the South. The Civil War was still going on, but it was nearing the end. And I think it was around 1864 that he traveled to North Carolina and started planting churches, AME Zion churches, and was a pioneer of Zion Methodism all through Carolina and beyond. But what's interesting is not only did he have a heart to plant churches and to build churches, he had a heart for education. And so, as you have stated, he became a power in the education throughout North Carolina. One of the churches that he planted was the St. Peter's AME Zion Church in New Bern, North Carolina. And around that time, there were some lay people in Concord, North Carolina, that wanted a school of higher learning, a college. And they got together and began what was called Zion Wesley Institute. But that effort kind of hit hard times, and that school ended up being closed. Well, around that time in New Bern, Joseph Charles Price, who had attended Lincoln University, the one you mentioned, came to the Sunday school there. And Mrs. Hood was so impressed with him that she introduced him to Bishop Hood. And Bishop Hood was so fascinated with him that he invited him to join him in what was the first World Methodist Council and Conference meeting, which was held in England.
Wow.
And Joseph Charles Price accompanied Bishop Hood to that council and to that conference. And he was allowed to speak about his vision for opening up again this college in North Carolina. He was able to raise $10,000 at that time, and that was a lot of money in those days. And from what he was able to raise, he came back to North Carolina and relaunched the school, naming it after the missionary David Livingstone, calling it Livingstone College. And as they say, the rest is history.
Fantastic. The rest is history, right? And when you speak about those oratorical skills of Joseph Charles Price, I'm reminded of a little, I guess, moniker with him. He is next to Frederick Douglass, who's supposed to be the world's greatest Negro orator. But even Frederick Douglass as well has roots in Zion Methodism, correct? One thing that I was really fascinated to learn is that the North Star was actually published in the basement of Memorial AME Zion Church in Rochester, New York. That was fascinating news to actually learn. So let's kind of shift a little bit to politics, since we talked about James Walker Hood and his him being a North Carolina statesman and his influence in politics. So I guess if we shift down through history, you're going to see how our church leaders are really influential in the political spectrum and the outcome for everyday lives of the everyday citizens within the United States. So we can look at Bishop Alexander Walters, right? For instance, one of the most important indicators in Black political clout is going to be he, William Monroe Trotter, and W.B. Du Bois. And so when you have these two parties, you have the Progressive Party and you have the Democratic Party. So these black leaders are not necessarily for this progressive party because of Teddy Roosevelt and his dealing with the Bronzeville um, lynching of the soldiers in Texas, right? And so they're looking for another party to get behind to lend their support. And so they go to the Democratic Party. And in this, you have them supporting President Woodrow Wilson, which we actually learned in the end was pretty much a bad decision. But I think what I'm really most interested in knowing is that how President Woodrow Wilson thought of the importance of these black leaders and to have their support. I actually saw in New York Public Library a letter of correspondence handwritten from President Woodrow Wilson to Bishop Alexander Walters, promising equity and opportunities for African Americans for their race as a whole moving over. So when I think of the leverage of one of our Episcopal leaders and how he influenced W.B. Du Bois to write in the crisis for African American leaders to support and African Americans overall to support President Woodrow Wilson, I think of just the influence overall that we have. So that's one of our Episcopal leaders with Bishop Alexander Walters. And then if we pretty much kind of move over to the college. So let's think of President Trent. Now, of course, we know President Trent, he's infamous for his touchdown that didn't happen in that December 27th, 1892 football game, right? The first football game that was played on an HBCU campus between two schools, HBCU schools, Middle Institute, which is now John C. Smith University, and of course, Livingstone College. And so this in history today is called the Commemorative Classic. Nevertheless, that's when William Trent was a student. When he became a leader and a leader of the race, Mayor McLeod Bethune recruited him to be a part of an unofficial group called the Black Cabinet with President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And so in this capacity, he served in several measures. He served within the Department of Interior, and he served for the Federal Works Project. And so I want us to just kind of consider how our Episcopal leaders and our leaders of our institution were quite pivotal in the movement, I'll say the massive movement of not necessarily the church and not necessarily the institutions, but of the race overall. So let's talk about our impact as it relates to that.
Yes, that is so significant. Let me go back to Joseph Charles Price and Frederick Douglass. Then I want to hit on Bishop Alexander Walters. Frederick Douglass went on record expressing his concern about the void in leadership in his later years until he heard Joseph Charles Price speak. And he said that now I can go to my grave knowing that our race has a champion that will speak on behalf of our people. Unfortunately, a few years after that, Joseph Charles Price died. And I think it was said by W.E. Du Bois that had Joseph Charles Price lived, Livingstone College would have become the Harvard of the South. Then when we talk about Bishop Alexander Walters, you talked about his influence, but I think it's significant to note that during his years of leadership, it was a dark time for Black people because the Reconstruction was met with a terrible backlash in which many Blacks were being lynched every year. Year after year, the numbers of lynchings began to grow as it approached the turn of the century, as it approached the 1900s. It was Bishop Alexander Walters, W.D. Bois, who got together and formed the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And Bishop Alexander Walters was the first chairman of that board. And so his influence in the society and in support of the advancement of the race was well grounded. And this is why I believe he had such influence with President Woodrow Wilson. So when you talk about Joseph Charles Price being a voice and an advocate for the race, and Dr. Trent being a voice and an advocate for the race, and Bishop Alexander Walters and Bishop James Walker Hood, these two threads, our college presidents and our bishops and leaders always gave emphasis not just to the work of the church, but understanding that that work includes the fight for justice and freedom for all people.
Yes, fantastic. And I think when you said pretty much educators and clergy, I'm thinking about preachers and teachers, which was the fundamental establishment of our institution, which
Yeah.
is fantastic. Okay, and you also mentioned, I guess, what we would define today as racial horrors, pretty much in the southern hemisphere of our nation, and so that puts me in the mind of, I guess, what we would call the racial science of ethnology, right? And so how you have this formation of, or this formula that is created, what we call caricatures today. We have a mammy figure, a Sambo figure, an uncle figure, a Pickaninny figure. But one thing that actually evolved during that time, I don't think a lot of people actually know it, is what they call a zip coon. And so this caricature was actually created in response to the the blacks who were actually intellectual in essence, but they were trying to I guess deconstruct um this notion that blacks could attain a certain type of intellectual level or could have a certain level of intellect, and so they created this zip coon caricature. So I don't know why I simply thought of that when you mentioned those leaders and their great oratorical skills, and also their ability to galvanize, to move the massive movement of the race and of the nations, but also to affect public policy. And I think that that's pretty much the key thing behind it, to affecting public policy. So as we think about public policy, we can actually think about things about voting, right? Because that's something that's popular today. Let me tell you a fun fact I know about voting, Bishop Starnes. On March the 31st, 1870, Thomas Mundy Peterson is going to be the first African American to cast his ballot after the Voter Rights Act is passed in York County, New Jersey. I learned that on a Black History calendar from Burger King. Funny, right? I haven't forgotten it. But as we think about the political spectrum again, how has Zion been mobile or been able to mobilize people? Let's even say today, I know we have something like Project 100 that's going on in our churches. How have we been able to mobilize individuals and get them involved in the political process? And how has that, in essence, affected the overall process of the plight of African Americans in America?
Well, our history has always been to be on the cutting edge of the fight for justice. In fact, that is how we earned the moniker the Freedom Church. And a significant part of freedom is the vote, is the right to vote, and securing that right to vote. And so great strides have been taken to keep people from exercising their right to vote. And so everywhere Amy Zion churches have been established, those church buildings and those leaders, those pastors and lay leaders, have always been those who welcomed the risk of fighting for the rights that God gives all people. I think I remember hearing Dr. Eliezer Merriweather, the new director of the Church Growth and Development for the Amy Zion Church, quote Bishop William Jacob Walls in his book about the Amy Zion Church, saying that whenever there was no other place to be found for a meeting for civil rights, they could always count on the Amy Zion Church to open its doors and its leaders to support. And so there's a long history of Amy Zion Church pastors and bishops and laity fighting and even leading the fight for civil rights and for voting rights and for justice. And so, most recently, in the uh, past presidential election, under the leadership of Bishop George Crenshaw, the Project 100 was launched, in which thousands and thousands of Amy Zion constituents uh, worked hard to get people registered, to get people voting, and we believe that that effort made a difference in the results in 2020, especially with the presidential election. And so we are still living up to that Freedom Church moniker, but the fight continues.
Okay. Mhm. And you mentioned civil rights in your comments. And so I attended a lecture once where people were doing some comparison to various denominations. And I know once Dr. King was actually on his way to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, to whereas he had to speak at Gola Memorial and Zion Church because he was not allowed to do so at the Baptist church in the area. So that kind of takes me to, I guess, the beginning movement of the civil rights movement, and how much of that is going to begin in Mount Zion and Zion Church in Montgomery, Alabama, right? It's most of, I guess, the area is infamous for the bus boycotts. But I kind of want to move back in history 100 years and then forward in history 1 year before that, because that's going to take place in 55. But we have in 1850, right? Roberts versus the city of Boston, to whereas you're going to see this the legality of segregated schools is actually upheld in Boston. And so, but you hear much of this, as I said it before, Plessy versus Ferguson, but then we get down to Brown versus the Board of Education. We know that that is a critical moment in history, pretty much, whereas it overturns Homer Plessy versus Ferguson, that's actually saying separate but equal is constitutional. Because today we have this notion of critical race theory. The one thing that I have realized is that it's somewhat going to begin with this notion of Brown versus Board of Education, because you have, when you have someone like Oliver Brown who's saying, hey, he's saying the same thing that Roberts is saying. My daughter is attending a school distance away from my home. She has to pass this school that is much in our district. We have to walk. The teachers, though, of course, Brown versus Board was several cases in one, but the teachers are complaining about inadequate pay, inadequate resources, all these things. The resolution, to me, when I think about it today, seems quite peculiar. We're stating that in order for us to have access to adequate resources, that we must desegregate. But when we desegregate, it means that another population must be present. So in this desegregation, we're saying Black kids need to go to the place where the resources are. We're never saying that white kids need to go to the Black schools, because then that would allow that these schools to gain the resources. Instead, we're saying we want this group to go over here to the resources, right? And so you see that, you really see that in Little Rock, Arkansas, where you have them with the Little Rock Nine, but it's a process. The first step is to first give everybody, every African American child in that district, an examination. After they give them the examination, they take the students who score at the level in which they wanted them to. Then after they did that, they went and interviewed them. And so from that population, they pick 9. And so with that 9, they choose that 9 to integrate or desegregate Central High School. But what happens to the other students? They never get the resources never goes to their schools. All of the resources are still at the white institution. And in order for you to have access to these resources, you must do what? You must go to the white institution to get that. Never the white students need to go to the Black institution to get that, right? And so in this is pretty much going to be, I guess, the foundation for what many feel are the inadequacies with HBCUs. right? We have this public school thought, and we feel as if the same thing comes with HBCUs. We feel some kind of way that HBCUs may be inadequate in essence because of resources. So I want us to talk about what else can institutions offer besides resources? What else is important? Let's consider cultural dignity. Let's consider pride. Let's consider things that are probably more internal than external, as into why HBCUs produce statistics are abound. 40% doctors, 25% lawyers, all of that. How is it that HBCUs are able to do that with these lack of resources?
Well, let me say first about the response to Browns versus the Board of Education. And then I want to touch on the uniqueness of HBCUs. When the law of the land was desegregation in 1954, many cities that had a large Black population experienced what is called white flight.
Mm-hmm.
What they did, they created municipalities all around the urban areas, all around those cities, where people moved outside the city limit and started this municipality and that municipality, so their children would not have to go to school with the Blacks who were in the urban areas. When they pulled away, it took away the tax base, because the tax money goes with the people who live in that city. And this is why we have urban schools that struggle, because those persons have pulled themselves away and left those urban schools without the resources they normally would have had. And so we have to understand that people will find a way to get around whatever the law is.
Gotcha.
Racism is in the heart.
Mm-hmm.
But let me talk about the uniqueness of HBCUs in general and Livingstone College in particular. You can't train a leader from a book. You can't develop character from a book, unless it's the Bible. It's people with character who train other people with character. It's leaders who pour in intangible qualities into the students that they teach, that brings about this high level of success stories in HBCUs. These professors and these teachers and these university presidents pour into these students, like myself and like many others. And that is something that goes beyond dollars and goes beyond buildings. But buildings are important. Dollars are important, but they're not as important as the quality of leadership development.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And in that, I heard, I guess, the essence of mentorship, right? Okay. And so that puts me in the mind of a Livingstonian and also a great leader within our denomination. And that's James Agri, right? Livingstone Student Union is named after James Agri. And as I think of James Agri, I have to say, I don't know much about him, right? But I do know that I was reading something once on Kwame Nkrumah, who stood there and said, "A greater than Agri is here." Right. So, and talking about, I guess, Ghana's independence. Would you like to speak some more on that? Would you like to speak on that?
Well, the important thing about the mission of the church is that it is to make disciples of Christ in all nations. And because of that, Andrew Cartwright, who was a pastor in the eastern part of North Carolina, around Albemarle, North Carolina, the Albemarle Conference of North Carolina. He had planted 10 churches in that area, had this burden to take the gospel to Africa. And so he left the shores of North Carolina by boat or by ship and went to the country of Ghana and started planting churches in Ghana, AME Zion churches in Ghana. And after a while, the Board of Bishops said to one of the bishops, "You need to go over there and see what Cartwright is doing." And so I'm trying to remember that bishop's name. I feel bad. But so that bishop went over and saw that God was doing a work there. But he met one of the young ministers, or one of the converts who became a minister while there, by the name of Agri. And he invited Agri to become a student at Livingstone College. And this was during the time that Joseph Charles Price was still leading the school.
Wow, okay.
And so Agri came across the ocean to Livingstone College and really became a mentee of Joseph Charles Price. And his leadership abilities surfaced and evolved to the point that it was clear that he was a mover and a shaker. But rather stay in the United States, he, after receiving his education, turned down many opportunities in the U.S. to teach and to lead schools, and went back to Ghana and started a college there and became a force, not just for education, but for the freedom fight. And this is how he influenced many of those who became leaders in the continent of Africa. It all started because of the missionary thrust, a missionary thrust that stressed the importance of education.
Fantastic. And as we think about the essence of education, let's bring down our institutions, because we've been quite busy here, right, with our institutions. Tell us where they are, their locations, and pretty much their reputation.
Okay, let's start with the U.S. Our flagship college is Livingstone College in Salisbury, North Carolina. It is where I graduated. It is a school from which I graduated, and I think you graduated. And many of our leaders in the AME Zion Church and beyond are graduates of Livingstone College. It was founded in 1879 as Zion Wesley Institute, and then in 1882 it became Livingstone College. We also have the Clinton College, which was Clinton Junior College in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And but in the last decade or so, it has become Clinton College. And I was at a meeting before this meeting with you about some exciting things that the president, Lester McCorn, has shared with the Board of Schools and Colleges of the AME Zion Church about some exciting things on the horizon. I need to say that the president of Livingstone College is the one who has really put this college on solid footing. I'm trying to remember, I think it was 2006 when he became the president. So carry the one. Is that 15 years?
15 years, President Jenkins.
And that is Dr. Jimmy Jenkins. And then we have Lomax Hannon Junior College in Greenville, Alabama. And this institution was a high school and a junior college and became a seminary extension. And just in the last few years, they're getting ready to make another shift. But it has many years of training leaders. One of our bishops, Bishop George Walker Sr., we call him the most Amy Zion person in history. He attended Lomax Hannon for high school. He attended Clinton Junior College. He attended Livingstone College, and he attended our seminary, Hood Theological Seminary in Salisbury, North Carolina. And that seminary is a graduate seminary. I'm a graduate of Hood Theological Seminary. I received my Master of Divinity there. And that institution is on the cutting edge. And I'm honored and humbled to be the chairman of the board of trustees for Hood Theological Seminary. Its president is Dr. Virgil Lattimore, a true gift to the body of Christ. And so these are some of our main institutions in America. Now, there have been institutions all over America through the years. Some of them have closed, but Atkinson College in Kentucky. There have been colleges in Arkansas, colleges, Dinwiddie in Virginia. Their colleges are institutes all over the country. But the four I just mentioned are the primary ones right now. And then in Liberia, we have the AME Zion University. And many of the leaders in the nation of Liberia were trained and got their undergraduate degree at the AME Zion University. And then we have Hood Speaks Seminary in Nigeria. And that seminary trains pastors for the ministry. And so the AME Zion Church has always stressed not only the making of disciples and the training of disciple makers, but also the training of clergy and lay leaders to make a difference in the world.
Fantastic, remarkable. And so I have a special treat for you. But before I show you all my special treat, I wanted to know, do you have any closing remarks, Bishop Starnes, that you want to, any lasting words you would like to leave us with?
I just want to say that this topic is so important. And I think about the words of President Jimmy Jenkins of Livingstone College. He says often that education is the best vehicle for upward mobility in this global society. And I believe that. However, I also say that the heart has to be educated. The soul has to be redeemed. Because without a spiritual renewal, our education leaves us on a singular plane. And I think that when we have that relationship with Christ and we take advantage of the educational opportunities, it enables us to not only have ability, but to care for people and to not use our opportunities for selfish aims, but to use our opportunities to serve people.
Amazing. Those are great remarks. And so I just want to say that I was previously the National Association of African American Honors Program 2018 president. And so Livingstone College hosted that wonderful event. We continue to participate in it. And tonight, our Student Government Association president, Mr. Justin E. Emmanuel Wade, participated in the oratorical contest. This year is hosted by Alabama State University. And we had a discussion about how it is important for HBCU to have an indefatigable spirit in America. Mr. Wade won first place in the oratorical contest. Let's give him a round of applause. And I would like to bring him on now to end our segment with his oration.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Parrish, and to Bishop Starnes, and to all who are working behind the scenes to make tonight what it is, and to our live viewing audience, as well as to all of those persons who participated tonight in our discussion and oratorical contest. And I do want to take this moment of personal privilege to bring greetings on behalf of the Student Government Association, where I have the privilege of serving as president. Now, Bishop Starnes, I cannot compete with the man who you talked about as being the most AME Zion preacher that you all have. But in a discussion I had recently with AME Zion, a frat brother of mine, I told him that I like to say now that I'm a Baptist minister, but AME Zion by way of collegiate experience. So I share in you all's history while being here at Livingstone, and it is indeed my honor. As Dr. Parrish has mentioned, allow me to have some, if you don't mind, Dr. Parrish, some leniency, if you will, now that I feel more at home in us discussing tonight in light of the subject matter of HBCUs, and in particular Livingstone College, in our oratorical contest. We dealt with the question, how do we deal with embracing the indefatigable spirit of advocacy and promotion of our HBCUs. And if you wouldn't mind indulging me in just sharing from what I shared earlier on tonight. Indefatigable is best defined as persisting tirelessly. It denotes unwearied, unrelenting, unfaltering, and unshakable. The best illustration of this word is found in the spirit of Mother Pollard of the Civil Rights Movement, who articulated in the heat of the struggle of the Montgomery bus boycott and needed to take a break because of her age, for she was indeed 72 years old. She says to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., "My feet are tired," quote, "but my soul is rested," end quote. It is the determination to fight and not give up until freedom, justice, and victory is attained. And I argue that this is at the heartbeat of our plight as HBCUs in America. For we must understand that the post-Reconstruction era for many African Americans was not reconstructive at all. You see, while the majority of Blacks, particularly in the South, had learned of their freedom from the demonic shackles of slavery, they had not escaped the vile and vicious spirit of America to make life hard for them post-freedom. Black codes were established in the South, and these laws granted certain legal rights to Blacks, including the right to marry, own property, and sue in court. But the codes also made it illegal for Blacks to serve on juries, testify against whites, or serve in state militias. Yes, times were difficult. The Black codes also required Black sharecroppers and tenant farmers to sign annual labor contracts with white landowners, and if they refused, they could be arrested and hired out for work. Yet, in spite of their tiresome situation post-slavery, family, faith, and here it is, Bishop Starnes, education remained the center of the African American spirit. The host institution that Dr. Parrish and I were part of tonight in the oratorical contest, Alabama State University, is a shining example that I'll use as a platform tonight of what it means to embrace this spirit of advocacy. See, Alabama State University was birthed out of men and women who understood the value of a fair opportunity for Blacks to be educated and equipped in America. And with the assistance of those white missionaries who understood equally its importance, and Northern and Southern Blacks who had come together gave birth to ASU, and for that school's history, 153 years, it has produced women and men like Joanne Robinson and Reverend Ralph David Abernathy and Dr. Frederick Shuttlesworth and the Honorable Dolores Thomas to take on the fight for justice. But with all of this amazing history, the primary question remains, what do we do now? Why is it important for Livingstone College and Clinton College and the host of other colleges that are under the AME Zion umbrella, and not just the AME Zion umbrella, but why is it important for HBCUs around this nation to embark and embrace the indefatigable spirit? There are three reasons why. I'll give them to you. One, our history builds us. When we look at the history of HBCUs in America, in particular, as has already been talked about and mentioned, Livingstone College, we are reminded of the platform that we stand on. Livingstone College being founded in 1879, originally as Zion Wesley Institute, the seminary for AME Zion Church preachers, and its founders, Dr. Joseph Charles Price and Bishop J.W. Hood, and their mission came under attack through the vitriolic racism made manifest by the Ku Klux Klan to burn down their building and seminary in Concord. However, these men and these students would not give up the fight and the press for a higher education and establish a place to have such. So the mission moves Bishop to Salisbury, North Carolina. It is here that the city awarded them $10,000 to rebuild their institution. And from it was birthed a new goal of not just establishing a seminary, but a college for all men and women to come, and would change the name to Livingstone College. Yes, this is our history as Livingstonians. It is the history that the AME Zion Church can definitely celebrate and rejoice over. But in the initiative that we embark upon to be one HBCU, it's not only AME Zion history, it's not only Livingstone College history, but it is our history. We have emerged from this context and setting, and now we stand on the shoulders of men and women who fought for us to be here and remain distinct and command our rightful place, as Dr. Jenkins would say, in our global society. And so by not embracing this spirit, we do our founders a grave disservice. But not only does our history build us, but then secondly, our present shapes us. Currently, according to HBCUcollegefair.com, HBCUs represent less than 3% of colleges and universities in the United States. HBCUs enroll 12% of all African American students. HBCUs produce 23% of all African American graduates. HBCUs confer 40% of all STEM degrees and 60% of all engineering degrees for African American students. HBCUs educate 50% of African American teachers and 40% of African American health professionals. It was an HBCU that produced the first Black female vice president of the United States in the person of Kamala Harris. And Bishop, these stats help us to combat the narrative that HBCUs are not preparing students for the real world. No, these facts teach us an even brighter principle that not only are students prepared for the real world, but we are producing students who change the world, redefine the world, and here it is, make a better world for those who are coming behind us. No, we are not without our challenges, as we are seeing across social media. No, we are not without the need for improvements. We are not without the need to make our campus life better, but we are also not without our great victory. And it is for this cause that we must continue the work. It is for this cause we must continue to protest against a Congress that has fought against an infrastructure bill that contained even more funding for HBCUs. We cannot lower the volume, but rather we must bring intensity. But then lastly, not only does our history build us, not only does our present shape us, but then thirdly and finally, our future will define us. None of us knows what the future holds. We all are AME Zion, or we're all Baptist, and we're all Christian. We understand that only God holds the future. None of us can exactly pinpoint what tomorrow will look like for the cause of advocating for our institutions. Yet, this must not deter us. You see, while we remain unsure of when we will reap, we must continue to sow in expectation of a great harvest. Malcolm X articulated that tomorrow only, quote, comes to those who prepare for it today, end quote. We must continue to teach each day. We must continue to march our students to the polls to vote. We must continue to take students where they are and transform them into what they are called to be. We must cease the in-house fighting of public versus private HBCUs so that we can embark upon that one HBCU initiative. I close with the words that we are also familiar with, and lift every voice and sing, where he says, "We have come over a way that with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughter. And out from that gloomy past till now we stand at last where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. Thank you.
President Justin Wade, a hand. And we are out of time. We want to thank you so much for joining our program. We want to thank the Star of Zion for hosting this event. And thank you all again for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next week when Freedom Speaks. Good night.
Night.